Imagine a crowded airport, a 14-year-old black boy waiting patiently, alone, at gate 18. What seemed like an ordinary moment quickly turns into something shocking. Why was he humiliated? A pilot made a snap judgment, but what he didn't know was that this boy was about to change the game in a way no one expected. The truth about his father left everyone speechless. Stay with us to find out how this tense situation unfolded and how justice was served in a surprising way. You won't believe what happened next. Stay with us until the end. Darius waited months for that day, but it took seconds for everything to fall apart. Suspicious looks, a hasty judgment, and the silent prejudice that lurks in the most common places would change everything in the blink of an eye. What no one knew was that this boy, on the verge of public humiliation, was about to shock the entire airport. In a few minutes he would make the terminal go silent, and the man who came to meet him had the power to completely change the game without saying a word. It was Friday, 9 a.m., Terminal 2 at the international airport, and the unexpected was about to happen. The airport was full of life, hurried families, anxious children, laughter and boarding calls echoing everywhere. In the middle of all this movement, near gate 18, Darius was sitting, calm, observing everything with attentive eyes. Navy blue polo shirt, clean jeans, clean sneakers. He seemed like just another curious boy. But for some, that wasn't enough. Darius loved airplanes. Each aircraft that taxied onto the runway was like a work of art to him, and his mind seemed to draw invisible routes in the sky. Your dream? Be a pilot. Your reason there? Waiting for his father, Derek Johnson, who would disembark shortly, so they could embark on a special weekend together. With headphones in his ears and a smooth jazz playlist, Darius relaxed. Your behavior? Irreproachable. But someone there saw everything differently. At the crew desk, a white pilot watched him with cold, suspicious eyes. I didn't try to understand, I just judged. He whispered to a flight attendant, "How long has he been there?" "About 20 minutes. Why?" "I don't know. Something's strange. He keeps looking at planes too much." The flight attendant hesitated, uncomfortable, and went back to work. But not the pilot. He crossed his arms and fixed his gaze on Darius, as if he was waiting for something wrong. For him, the simple fact that a black boy was there, alone and interested in airplanes, was reason enough to raise suspicions. And he wasn't the only one. A few meters away, a couple also whispered, "He's alone. Is he lost? Or maybe up to something? Look how he watches the planes. Very strange." The words did not reach Darius's ears, but the looks, these he felt, and how. It was like carrying an invisible weight, the weight of always having to prove that I belonged there. It wasn't the first time. Have you ever felt this feeling too, of being judged? Comment below. Darius took a deep breath. I knew that sometimes an innocent gesture could be misinterpreted. He maintained his posture. He turned down the volume of the music and picked up his cell phone. Message sent, Darius. "Dad, I'm already at gate 18. Is everything okay there?" Derek. "Leaving the arrivals hall. I'll meet you in 5 minutes." Relief. In a few minutes, everything would pass. He would be with his father. They would embark and have the weekend they had been waiting for. But Darius didn't know that. At that exact moment, something was about to happen, and the pilot's accusing look would turn into an action that would change everything. Captain Ron Mathers, a 52-year aviation veteran with almost 3 decades of service, stared at Darius as if facing an invisible threat, but what bothered him weren't actions. It was pure prejudice. No suspicious attitudes, no unusual behavior. Even so, in his mind, the pilot was already building a distorted story. Black teenager, alone, watching too many planes. Something is wrong, thought Ron, ignoring the obvious explanation. a young aviation enthusiast waiting for his father. But the pilot didn't want simple answers. I wanted an apology. Without wasting time, he approached a boarding employee. "Do you know what that boy is doing there? Has anyone from his family boarded?" The employee responded naturally. "He's just waiting for someone. He hasn't presented a ticket yet." But that wasn't enough. Captain Ron returned to the crew area, picked up his cell phone, and sent a quick but judgmental message. "Suspect at gate 18. Young black man alone, observing planes with strange behavior. I request a preventive approach before boarding." Within seconds, the roulette wheel of destiny was spun. Meanwhile, Darius, sitting calmly, was just counting the minutes until he was reunited with his father. He had no idea that he was about to experience a humiliating moment, a situation that would mark his life forever. All because of biased looks, a shallow assumption, and a system that once again confuses prejudice with precaution. Ron's message reached Homeland Security in less than 2 minutes. Even vaguely, in times of strict protocols, any shadow turns into a storm. 2 uniformed agents were immediately sent to Gate 18. They walked steadily, faces closed, as if they already knew they would encounter a problem. The problem: a black boy sitting, listening to music and looking at planes. Darius, distracted by his cell phone, didn't even notice the agents approaching until they stopped in front of him. "Excuse me, boy. Can we talk for a moment?" Darius, confused, took off his headphones. "What? Is there a problem?" "We need you to come with us. We've received a notification about suspicious behavior. It's standard procedure." Within seconds, the power at gate 18 changed. People began to watch. Whispers emerged from corners. Some were already looking at Darius with that old, silent judgment. I knew there was something wrong with him. Darius slowly stood up, heart racing. He knew what was happening, but he didn't understand why. Once again, he had to prove he wasn't a threat. Darius's heart was racing. Without understanding why, he tried to remain calm. "I'm just waiting for my father. Let's travel together." But the security guards remained cold, without a trace of empathy. "Open the backpack." Right there, in the middle of the crowded lobby, Darius was searched in front of dozens of curious and judgmental eyes. Everything was exposed: cell phone, notebooks, an aviation magazine, a portable charger. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing illegal, nothing suspicious. Even so, the agents' gazes remained heavy, as if they hoped at any cost to find something that would justify public humiliation. Darius felt the weight of the gazes boring into his skin. His face was burning, his throat was dry, and his hands were shaking. He fought the urge to explode, but he took a deep breath and tried once again to defend himself. "My father, he's a federal agent. He's arriving at the gate now. You can ask him." What came in response was a mocking laugh from one of the agents. "Federal agent, okay." Meanwhile, on the other side of the lobby, Captain Ron watched the scene looking satisfied, arms crossed, believing he had done right. Not for a second did he suspect that he was about to be publicly and irreversibly exposed. But the worst was yet to come. The atmosphere became even more tense when one of the agents, now with a more aggressive stance, took a step forward and fired, "Hands where I can see them, kid." The sentence cut through the silence like thunder. Darius froze. The agents began to surround him, and one of them discreetly reached for his belt next to the taser. The gesture alone was enough to chill Darius inside. Fear took over. The sweat ran cold. "I didn't do anything. I'm just waiting for my father." His voice, once firm, now trembled, and without knowing it, Darius was seconds away from seeing the situation turn in a way that no one at that airport would ever forget. "My dad, he works here, please." Darius's voice was choked almost, like a cry for help, but his words seemed to evaporate into thin air. For those security guards, Darius was not a polite teenager, curious about aviation. They only saw the stereotype. Without warning, one of the agents grabbed the boy's arm tightly. "Are you resisting the approach?" "No, I just want to call my dad. The cell phone is in my pocket. Slow down." The heavy silence in the room turned into a storm of tension. People started filming discreetly. Others just watched, with looks divided between pity and judgment. It was impossible not to feel the weight of injustice in the air. It was then that Captain Ron approached, showing concern. "Is there a problem with this boy?" "He has been identified as a suspect. We are investigating." One of the security guards responded without hesitation. Ron feigned surprise, but there was something more in his gaze. It was clear he wanted to see it fall apart. Maybe he truly thought he was protecting someone, or maybe he was just another man refusing to confront his own prejudice. Darius, cornered, looked around. He felt his face burn. But it wasn't the shame of having done something wrong. It was the shame of being treated as a threat, simply for being there. He took a deep breath and tried, once again. "My dad. He's head of the FBI. He's coming here now. I'm just waiting for him." The security guard couldn't hold back his mocking laughter. "Oh, of course. And I'm the president." That answer landed like a punch in Darius's stomach. The surrounding audience, this silent, invisible audience, seemed to buy that distorted version. After all, who would believe that a young black man alone could be the son of one of the most powerful men in the country? But what no one knew, Derek Johnson was already at the airport, and he was watching everything. The siege of the sun, the arrogance of the security guards, Ron's satisfied look. Except Derek wasn't just a father. At that moment, he was a time bomb ready to explode with surgical precision. Meanwhile, Darius struggled to hold back his tears and hold on to his dignity, even though he was treated like a criminal without having done anything at all. And the clock was about to reset. "What's your full name?" "Darius Johnson." The questions came like an interrogation. "Do you have a boarding ticket?" "My father was going to check in with us. He bought the tickets." "And where is he?" "He's already here at the airport. He works. He's head of a division of the FBI." The silence that followed was heavy, like a condemnation. One of the security guards exchanged glances with the other, a mocking smile on his face. "Look, now he's the son of the FBI. Soon he'll say his father is the president." The words cut like blades, more painful than any slap. But Darius remained silent, fighting the anger rising in his chest. He knew that if he reacted aggressively, everything would get worse. But how to deal with the weight of such an absurd situation? On the other side of the glass, Derek Johnson watched with imperturbable calm. He had just arrived at the gate and immediately recognized the scene. It wasn't the first time he saw his son being the target of suspicious looks, but this was different, more grotesque, more unfair. With the calmness of someone who knows the weight he is carrying, Derek walked slowly. The dark blazer and rigid posture betrayed the authority that accompanied him, but nothing in the world could prepare him for the impact of facing that moment. Impeccable white shirt and a firm gaze that crossed the terminal. No rush in the steps, just authority. As Darius was pressed to prove where his father was, his eyes finally settled on a figure coming towards him. A feeling of relief exploded in his chest. "Father!" Darius's voice choked, barely managed to escape his lips. The security guards, the pilot, everyone turned around at the same time. And what they saw was a black man, imposing with a haughty bearing, with a fixed and determined look, walking towards the group. The agent who had laughed seconds before took a step back. "Is there a problem with my son?" Derek asked, with an icy calm in his voice, but with an authority that everyone knew and respected. It was clear the problem was never the boy, and now they had a real problem on their hands. The silence at the boarding gate stretched tensely. Even the sound, of distant turbines seemed to have ceased. Derek Johnson inched forward, his eyes moving from his son to the two security guards and finally to the pilot. I asked, "Is there a problem with my son?" He repeated with the same calm tone but full of power. The security guards looked at each other. One of them, trying to regain control, said, "We received a report of suspicious behavior. We just followed protocol." "What kind of behavior?" Derek interrupted, no longer patient, watching planes, waiting for Dad, sitting in silence. Darius stood up beside his father, relief flooding his body as if he could finally breathe. The security guard tried to justify. "He said you were from the FBI, and you thought it was a lie." Derek, unfazed, slowly pulled out his badge and held it out, displaying the official FBI seal. "I'm a regional division chief, and you just intimidated and embarrassed the son of a federal officer for no legitimate reason." The security guards' faces turned pale. Now, Derek stared blankly at the pilot, who seemed to have lost all confidence from the start. "And you are the one who made the complaint?" The pilot tried to defend himself. "I just thought it was strange. He was alone, watching too much." "In times like these," Derek interrupted with a biting coldness, "in times like these, it is even more dangerous to make decisions based on stereotypes. My son is 14 years old, with exemplary behavior, and was treated like a criminal just because of the color of his skin. This is not safety. This is abuse." The words fell like stones to the ground. The embarrassment was palpable. Some people around started to whisper. The atmosphere was filled with shame. There was no screaming. There were no exaggerated scenes. Just the presence of a man who knew exactly what power he possessed and how to use it with precision without losing his composure. "I want to speak now to the terminal supervisor and the airline representative. This will be handled later today. Here, without delay." The tension in the air was palpable, and the weight of injustice hung over everyone. Derek looked at his son, a calm look, but full of firmness. "It's okay now, Darius. I'm here." Darius just nodded, his heart still racing, but now mixed with a feeling of pride, relief, and outrage. Most importantly, respect. Not only from his father, but also from everyone around him, even those who previously looked at him with suspicion. Minutes after the confrontation, the authorities arrived. The terminal supervisor and an airline representative hurriedly approached, their faces betraying that they had already been alerted to the seriousness of the situation. Derek, with the elegance of someone in control, received them. But there was no room for delicacy. "I'm Darius Johnson, chief of the FBI's Chicago Regional Division. My son was stopped, searched, and publicly exposed for no reason." He pointed to the pilot Ron, who caused it all, and continued, "The security guard's actions were clearly influenced by superficial and discriminatory judgment." The supervisor and representative exchanged nervous glances. They didn't expect that. "We apologize, Mr. Johnson. We didn't know that." "It's not about who I am," interjected Derek with cutting calm. "It's about who he is. A citizen, a teenager, a passenger with the same rights as anyone here." The supervisor tried to argue, but Derek wouldn't allow it. "Protocol requires that any approach be based on objective behavior, not appearance. And yet you kept my son under constraint after he explained the situation." Darius was next to his father, silent, but now with a firm stance. For the first time, the looks were not of distrust, but of respect, of shame, of recognition of the error. Derek stepped forward with unquestionable authority. "I demand immediate action. This pilot endangered the emotional and physical integrity of a minor based on veiled racism. This cannot end in an informal apology." The supervisor took a deep breath, knowing there was no turning back. "Captain Ron Matz is relieved of duty. He will not be commanding this flight, and an internal investigation will be opened immediately." Ron tried to react, his anger visible. "That's absurd." I just wanted to protect. Protect who? Derek cut firmly. The only one at risk here was my son, because he was sitting, waiting, being black. The silence in the terminal was total. Derek then turned to the security guards. You will be formally removed while the conduct is investigated. All records of this approach, including camera footage, will be requested. I've already been in touch. The case would not end there. The truth was being unearthed, and no one could ignore it anymore. The tension in the air was palpable, and everyone in the terminal knew that this episode would not go unnoticed. With the airport's federal ombudsman's office already involved, the impact was immediate. The situation would be treated with the urgency and seriousness it always should have had. The makeshift room at the back of the departure gate seemed even colder than the air conditioning could justify. The atmosphere was one of embarrassment, guilt, and a guilty conscience. Derek Johnson, standing, stood his ground. He wasn't there as an FBI agent. He was there like a wounded but unshakable father. You understand the seriousness of this, correct? The airline manager couldn't face Derek directly, but he nodded, speechless, because it wasn't a procedural error. It was a character error. The manager, without answers, finally said in a tense voice, Captain Ron Matters will be formally terminated from the company. His conduct was unacceptable. He acted based on a stereotype without any real justification. Derek didn't show surprise. It was the least expected, but what happened next was about to be even more damning. He turned to the representative of the airport security department, two supervisors and the security guards responsible for searching Darius, who kept their eyes down, looking like children waiting for reprimand. These two agents are officially suspended as of this moment, the supervisor reported. Their conduct will be investigated by internal bodies and by the federal ombudsman's office. Derek then asked a question with all the intensity that the situation demanded. If it weren't for you recognizing me as head of the FBI, would you have continued treating my son like a criminal? The silence was absolute. That's what worries me most, he continued, his voice firm, cutting through the air. This happens every day to boys like my son. The difference is that, most of the time, no one arrives in time to stop the injustice from happening. Derek's words fell like stones. The impact was profound, and those present remained in respectful silence, aware of the weight of it all. He looked at his watch, and with surprising calm said, I don't want a scandal, I don't want the media, but I want justice, and it started here today. He paused before concluding, From now on, we will leave the necessary records, and my son will board normally, as any other passenger should board. Darius, at his father's side, remained firm, although emotional. He held back tears because he knew that this moment was much bigger than himself. It was about representing something, about showing that dignity is not asked for. It is imposed with respect and courage. And in that departure hall, surrounded by now embarrassed looks, Darius Johnson took the first step towards the gate. By your side, your father, and the person who paved the way was the airline manager himself. On the airport information board, the flight status for Atlanta was still marked as en route. While waiting to board, the atmosphere at the airport had changed drastically. Inside the aircraft, the crew had already been changed. Captain Ron Matters was no longer in command. He was discreetly removed by the airline, without the right to return to the cockpit. Sitting alone in the pilot's mess, his hands were shaking slightly, and no matter how much he tried to justify his actions, deep down he knew. He didn't act out of zeal, but out of fear. Fear of a black boy sitting silently. The two security guards who had surrounded Darius were also relieved of their duties. They passed through the terminal's internal corridors, under the curious and silent gazes of colleagues who already knew something very serious had happened. In the internal security room, the preliminary report was already being prepared, and the camera recordings showed the truth of everything. Darius, sitting calmly, was approached without any provocation. Trying to politely explain that he was waiting for his father. Nothing in the images justified the treatment he had received. "This will go to the conduct committee later today," said the supervisor as the weight of truth spread across the room. Meanwhile, Darius and Derek were sitting together, waiting to board. The flight, now with a new captain, would depart 30 minutes late, but for them, and time no longer mattered. Derek looked at his son with silent pride. "You were strong." "I tried not to cry," said Darius, his eyes still shining. "Ah, but it hurt." Derek nodded. "I know. Unfortunately, it may hurt again, but you will never be alone." Darius absorbed those words like an anchor. Something inside him matured at that moment. It wasn't because of pain, but because of resistance with dignity. For the justice that was done in front of you before everyone's eyes. When they were finally called to board, Derek made sure his son got on first, received by the new flight attendant with a sincere and respectful smile. As they walked along the finger towards the aircraft, Darius looked back. The boarding gate now looked normal, but he knew that on that floor at that moment, something fundamental had changed. Something important had happened, and even without spotlights, without headlines, right one over wrong. The car flight finally took off, and with it, Darius felt something rising inside him. It wasn't just the altitude, it was a feeling that was difficult to describe. A mix between pride and relief, anger and overcoming. Outside, the clouds passed slowly, and below, Chicago continued its normal rhythm, as if nothing had happened. But inside that plane, Darius knew. He had experienced something he would never forget. It wasn't just an unfair approach. It wasn't just a prejudiced pilot or two poorly trained security guards. It was an entire system, for a few minutes, trying to reduce who he was to a stereotype. But that day, the system lost. He remained calm, had a father who arrived at the right time, and saw that justice firmly and without hatred can be done. Upon landing in Atlanta, Derek and Darius followed together, talking about the future, about turning pain into awareness, and about how to stand up, even when the world tries to push you down. And you, who have followed this story so far, what would you do in Darius's place? Do you think justice was enough, or should it go further? We want to know your opinion. If stories like this make you reflect, move, or inspire you, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. We still have many stories to tell.